Imagine a world before rights, before easy communication, a world ruled by steel and faith. You think you know the Middle Ages. Forget the kings and knights for a moment. Our story isn't about them. It's about a whisper in the stone halls of a French fortress, the fierce heart of a girl named Alys de Valois, born to a minor noble family in 13th century France, whose life was a secret war for survival and power, crossing the Channel to the unforgiving wilds of medieval Scotland. Her decisions didn't just affect her life, they altered the fate of kingdoms. Alys de Valois was born in 1278, not to a glittering Parisian court, but to a small, fiercely proud noble family in the Île-de-France region. Her father, Baron Henri de Valois, was a third son, a man whose ambition vastly outstripped his inheritance. From her earliest years, Alys understood that her life was a commodity. While noble boys were trained in the jest of warfare, Alys was schooled in the jest of diplomacy and observation, a crucial distinction for a girl whose only real power would be the strategic application of her lineage and wit. Her lessons included Latin, rhetoric, and the complex, invisible lines of fealty and debt that held the Capetian kingdom together. She was taught to look past the velvet and recognize the true currency of the age: land, blood, and alliances. The shadow that loomed over her childhood was not of poverty, but of her value as a political pawn, a piece to be moved by men in the great game of France. Her mother, Isabel, a woman of quiet strength and sharper mind, instilled in Alys a fundamental distrust of promises and a reliance on her own counsel, a trait that would prove invaluable when her world inevitably turned upside down. The French court, despite its distance, was a nexus of European power, and even a minor noble like Baron Henri paid close attention to its movements. The talk of the day often revolved around the volatile state of Scotland. The great cause was brewing, the question of who would succeed the recently deceased child Queen Margaret. This instability presented a unique, if dangerous, opportunity for peripheral French nobles seeking to ascend. Henri, sensing the winds of change and realizing his opportunities in France were limited, began a subtle campaign of communication with one of the competing Scottish claimants, a powerful, rugged man with a formidable claim and a need for French political and financial support. This man, whose name was whispered carefully, needed to solidify his alliances with continental Europe. Alys, now a budding adolescent, often listened unseen behind tapestries as her father and his agents discussed the intricate, brutal calculus of marriage proposals, land grants, and political debt. She realized the proposal for her hand was more than just a union. It was a cornerstone in a bid for a crown, and she was the mortar. Her future was no longer confined to the peaceful forests of Valois. It was heading north, toward a land of feuding clans and eternal border wars. The deal was struck in 1294. Alys, then 16, was to marry Lord Duncan MacLeod, a fierce Scottish noble whose allegiance was crucial to the rising contender for the Scottish throne. The marriage contract was a masterwork of self-interest. It guaranteed Baron Henri significant landholdings in Gascony and provided Lord MacLeod with a French connection that implied royal support, whether genuine or not. The prospect of leaving the relatively ordered society of France for the rugged, unpredictable clans of Scotland filled Alys with both terror and a thrilling sense of agency. She understood that in Scotland she would be away from the direct, suffocating control of the French king and her immediate family. The journey itself was fraught with peril: a difficult overland trek to the coast, a tempestuous sea voyage across the Channel and the Irish Sea, and finally a long, exposed march north through territories where loyalties were as shifting as the fog. Alys prepared not with a wedding trousseau of silk and lace, but with a hidden dagger
and a meticulously catalogued mental list of every weakness and strength of her father's agents and her soon-to-be husband's escorts. She realized that she was not going to be a bride, but an emissary, and her survival depended on her ability to negotiate, not just to obey.
The arrival of Alys de Valois at Castle MacLeod, nestled deep in the rugged Scottish Highlands, was a collision of cultures. The castle was not the refined, manicured stone structure she had known in France, but a formidable, cold keep built for defense against constant feuding. Lord Duncan MacLeod was everything her French noble suitors were not. A man of imposing physicality, rough-hewn manners, and an almost brutal directness. Their marriage ceremony, performed in a drafty chapel by a stern-faced priest, was a purely political act. There was no romance, only a silent, tense exchange of vows and rings. Alys, however, observed him closely. She noted his genuine, though often harsh, loyalty to his men, his profound grasp of the Gaelic language and the complexities of clan law, and his deep-seated resentment of the encroaching English influence. This was not a soft man, but a powerful, necessary ally. Alys knew she could not fight him, but she could learn from him and, crucially, influence him. She immediately set about learning the local dialect, studying the clan's finances, and positioning herself as a useful asset rather than just a foreign wife. The challenge of Castle MacLeod was not simply physical, it was administrative and psychological. The household staff was loyal to the clan, not to the French interloper. Alys began her work systematically. She brought the meticulous accounting methods she had learned in France to the castle's chaotic finances, identifying and stopping leaks of coin and resources. She mastered the art of managing the provisioning of the keep, which was an essential military function in a siege-prone territory. Her French refinement, initially a source of suspicion, became a tool. She subtly improved the quality of the castle's hospitality, hosting visiting clan leaders with a blend of exotic continental fare and impeccable diplomacy, thereby subtly elevating Lord MacLeod's reputation among his peers. She did not seek to change Duncan's nature, but to enhance his political effectiveness. She learned that while Duncan commanded by strength, she could command by intellect, managing the necessary political details that he disdained. Within a year, the grizzled factor of the castle, a man who initially treated her with undisguised contempt, begrudgingly acknowledged her acumen, calling her the French comptroller. Alys's role soon transcended domestic administration. Lord MacLeod's chosen contender for the throne, while strong in military might, was weaker in diplomatic finesse and was chronically short of funds. Using the correspondence skills learned in her youth, Alys began secretly managing the delicate exchange of letters and funds between Castle MacLeod and her French connections. She leveraged her family name, implying a level of French royal backing that did not truly exist, but which was vital for morale and international perception. She became Duncan's trusted, if unofficial, chief political strategist. She advised him on which minor clans to appease, which to threaten, and how to frame the contention against the English-backed claimant. Her most significant contribution came during a crucial gathering of nobles where the choice of the new king was debated. Alys, though not permitted to speak in the assembly, drafted the precise legalistic arguments that Duncan presented, arguments that appealed to the historical and legal rights of their chosen candidate, arguments that clearly bore the mark of superior continental schooling. She was the ghost in the great hall, the quiet, formidable intelligence guiding the brawny action. The rise of Edward I of England, known as the Hammer of the Scots, cast a long, chilling shadow over Alys's new home. Edward's ambition was absolute, to subjugate the entire island under his rule. The political maneuvering Alys had mastered was suddenly rendered obsolete by the brute force of an invading army. When the inevitable conflict broke out, Castle MacLeod became a critical strategic target, lying near a key coastal route and a vital mountain pass. Lord MacLeod, a fierce warrior, immediately took to the field, leaving Alys behind to manage the war effort from the home front. This meant organizing not just the castle's defenses, overseeing the stockpiling of food and water, securing the gates, and managing the morale of the garrison, but also coordinating the flow of intelligence. She established a network of spies and messengers, including local crofters and ostensibly neutral merchants, using secret codes and routes to ensure that critical information about English troop movements reached Duncan and his allies on the front lines. The castle, under her command, transformed from a noble residence into a hardened, efficient military outpost. The moment Alys had dreaded arrived. An English raiding party, led by a ruthless, ambitious captain, unexpectedly laid siege to Castle MacLeod. Duncan and his main forces were miles away. Alys was now the commander. The siege was brutal, characterized by constant skirmishes and attempts to breach the walls. Alys's French schooling in strategy proved invaluable. She used feints, rationing, and psychological warfare to demoralize the attackers. For instance, she ordered the cooking fires to burn high at odd hours, suggesting the castle was constantly resupplied and well-provisioned. And she had the garrison shout specific false intelligence about the imminent return of MacLeod's army towards the English lines during the darkest hours of the night. Her most crucial decision came when the English attempted to tunnel under the wall. Instead of panicking, Alys ordered the tunneling to be met with a counter-tunneling operation, and on her advice had boiling pitch mixed with human waste dumped onto the English sappers, a gruesome but highly effective medieval defense that broke their will to continue the subterranean assault. She personally walked the ramparts every night, a slight figure offering words of praise and encouragement, becoming a symbol of unbreakable resistance. The siege eventually devolved into a stalemate. The English captain, short on supplies and facing the possibility of MacLeod's return, sent a messenger under a flag of truce, demanding Alys's surrender and threatening to execute all his prisoners of war from previous skirmishes. Alys, realizing a full siege would eventually starve them all, took the immense risk of meeting the captain face-to-face at the parley point, just outside the main gate, against the frantic advice of her men. She arrived not in armor, but in her finest gown, radiating authority and French aristocracy. She did not plead, she negotiated. She pointed out the folly of his protracted siege, the cost of his failing supply lines, and the certain vengeance of Lord MacLeod. She offered him not gold, but safe passage, and the promise that their commander would never learn of his strategic failure, which would preserve the captain's professional pride. Alys was not only trading lives for passage, she was trading the captain's professional pride for the survival of the castle. Her cold, rational assessment of his self-interest, delivered with continental polish, worked. The English force lifted the siege the next morning, retreating quietly, leaving Alys de Valois with the legend of having defended a critical Scottish castle against a division of the Hammer's army, earning her the begrudging respect and eternal loyalty of the MacLeod clan. Alys's successful defense of Castle MacLeod did more than just preserve a strategic holding. It fundamentally shifted the dynamics of her relationship with Lord Duncan MacLeod. The initial political arrangement had matured into a partnership founded on grudging respect, then genuine trust. Duncan, a man who measured worth in deeds, saw Alys not just as his wife, but as his most capable general and advisor. Post-siege, Alys focused on solidifying this power. She oversaw the repair of the castle, establishing a more effective system for regional intelligence gathering. Crucially, she began to use the vast network of spies she had established, not just for military purposes, but for political maneuvering among the Scottish clans. She learned the personal secrets, debts, and grudges of the other lords, weaving a complex web of information that allowed her to predict alliances and undermine opposition to MacLeod's political agenda. She maintained her French correspondence, but now used it to subtly enhance Scotland's strategic position, playing the French interest against the English threat. A dangerous, high-stakes game of diplomacy where any misstep could lead to her and MacLeod's ruin. The birth of Alys and Duncan's son, Liam, the heir to the MacLeod lands, cemented Alys's position. She ensured Liam received an education that blended the best of both worlds: the martial skills, fierce independence, and knowledge of clan law prized by the Scots, combined with the rigorous Latin, rhetoric, and diplomatic finesse essential to continental nobility. Alys personally oversaw the rhetoric and history lessons, teaching Liam the art of persuasion and the long-view strategy necessary to survive the endless conflict for the Scottish crown. She used their lineage as a tool, constantly reminding Liam that he was both a MacLeod chieftain and a Valois noble, giving him a claim to influence far beyond the Highlands. Duncan, proud of his son's growing strength and intellect, deferred to Alys on all matters of Liam's intellectual and political instruction. This control over the next generation was Alys's ultimate strategic move, ensuring her influence would outlive both her and Duncan, establishing a dynasty that was culturally Scottish but politically sophisticated. As the political landscape became ever more perilous, with the English king making moves to install a puppet ruler, Alys decided a direct intervention was necessary. She orchestrated a secret meeting far from the eyes of both English spies and overly zealous Scottish lords with a representative of the French king. This agent, a cunning diplomat named Guillaume, arrived under the guise of a spice merchant. The purpose of the meeting was not simply to secure funds, which they desperately needed, but to negotiate a formal renewal of the old alliance, the historic pact between Scotland and France. Alys was determined to prove to France that the Scottish resistance was a viable strategic investment, one that could distract England. She presented Guillaume with a meticulous, coded analysis of the English king's troop deployments and the weaknesses in their logistical chain. She acted not as Lord MacLeod's wife, but as Scotland's shadow ambassador, impressing Guillaume with her geopolitical acumen. Her successful negotiation secured a vital injection of French gold and, more importantly, a renewed pledge of diplomatic support, positioning the MacLeod clan at the very center of the struggle for Scottish independence.
The succession struggle in Scotland intensified, fracturing the noble class into rival factions, all manipulated by the hovering hand of Edward I. MacLeod's chosen candidate, while initially strong, began to falter, lacking the widespread support necessary to unify the disparate clans. Alys recognized the danger. A weak Scottish king meant an easy English conquest. She determined that they needed to back a dark horse, a younger, less immediately powerful, but more charismatic and politically astute candidate who could unify the fractured lords. This required a monumental shift in MacLeod's loyalty, a move that risked accusations of betrayal and political suicide. Alys meticulously gathered intelligence on the new candidate, assessing his character, his political depths, and his hidden strengths. Then she spent weeks slowly, patiently convincing Duncan, who valued loyalty above all else, that the current path was fatal. She presented her findings not as emotional arguments, but as cold, irrefutable military and financial projections, eventually persuading him to make the most dangerous political pivot of their lives. The turning point came at a grand assembly of Scottish nobles convened to discuss their collective resistance to Edward I.
Duncan, now convinced of Alys's strategy, was prepared to publicly switch his allegiance to the new candidate. However, just as he rose to speak, a rival lord, secretly bankrolled by the English, publicly accused MacLeod of treason, claiming he was a French agent preparing to hand over strategic Scottish lands to the Capetian king. The hall erupted in chaos and suspicion. Alys, watching from the gallery, instantly realized the gravity of the calculated attack. She didn't wait for Duncan to defend himself. She immediately descended and, invoking the right of her noble birth and her established history in Scotland, demanded to speak. She addressed the lords in fluent, though accented Gaelic, not defending her husband's loyalty, but attacking the accuser's financial state and his family's known history of border skirmishes with England, proving his accuser was the one who had secretly profited from English coin and was attempting to sow discord. Her swift, fact-based public dismantling of the accusation saved the situation and allowed Duncan to make his pivot successfully. The public backing of Lord MacLeod, strategically guided by Alys's political intelligence, gave the new candidate the crucial momentum he needed. Alys worked relentlessly in the following months, coordinating the efforts of the MacLeod clan with the disparate factions now supporting the claimant. She leveraged their French connections for material aid and, crucially, for international recognition, ensuring that the European courts viewed this man as the legitimate king, not an English vassal. When the decisive military victory was finally achieved and the candidate was crowned, Alys's role was undeniable, though entirely unsung. She became the true power behind the throne, the anonymous kingmaker. The new king immediately granted Duncan significant new landholdings and an elevated title, but Alys insisted on a further, more subtle reward: guaranteed access to the royal court for her son Liam, and a strategic position for one of her French-trained advisors within the king's household administration. She sought not glory, but the enduring security and advancement of her own dynasty.
The MacLeod's elevated status brought with it greater power, but also greater danger. As Alys's influence became undeniable, she attracted the envy and suspicion of older, established noble families who resented the French interloper and her rapid ascent. They formed a powerful cabal intent on undermining her. Their method was not military, but legal and spiritual. They convinced a notoriously hardline and anti-foreigner cleric, Archbishop Thomas of Clydesdale, to launch an informal ecclesiastical inquiry into Alys. The claim was that her French-style administration and her reliance on unnatural intellectual pursuits were a form of witchcraft and heresy, a common tactic used to destroy powerful women in the Middle Ages. This was far more dangerous than any siege. Accusation alone could lead to the confiscation of their lands and the burning of Alys at the stake. Alys knew she could not rely on MacLeod's military might to fight this battle. She had to fight with doctrine, precedent, and the subtle deployment of evidence. Alys's French education proved once again to be her shield. She used her knowledge of Latin and canon law to defend herself. Instead of denying the accusations of her unusual learning, she leaned into it. She presented the archbishop with meticulously copied sections of theological texts and Latin commentaries, proving that her lessons and administrative methods were derived from approved continental Christian scholars, not from pagan or heretical sources. She showcased her household's exemplary religious observance and presented evidence of her charitable works for local monasteries and poor families, all strategically implemented over the years. Her defense was not emotional, it was a devastating, legalistic counterargument, proving her adherence to orthodoxy and subtly exposing her accusers as politically motivated liars. She even leveraged her French contacts to secure a letter of commendation from a respected bishop in Paris, making it difficult for the archbishop to condemn her without defying continental ecclesiastical authority. Alys didn't stop at merely defending herself. She seized the opportunity to turn the investigation against her political rivals. She provided Archbishop Thomas with an anonymous but detailed accounting of the financial discrepancies in the landholdings of her chief accuser, Lord Sinclair, implying that his wealth was derived from illicit dealings and potentially heretical usury, a major offense to the church. She let the Archbishop, already zealous in his duties, connect the dots himself. The result was not just Alys's exoneration, but the downfall of her chief antagonist. The Archbishop, satisfied with Alys's piety and delighted by the opportunity to persecute a wealthy, politically influential noble, shifted his focus entirely to Lord Sinclair. Sinclair's lands were temporarily seized pending investigation, effectively neutralizing the most immediate threat to MacLeod's power. Alys had successfully used the church's formidable power, not by fighting it, but by aligning herself with its authority and redirecting its fury toward her enemies, cementing her reputation as a political tactician of unmatched, quiet ruthlessness.
With her enemies neutralized and her son, Liam, now a rising star at the royal court, Alys de Valois' influence reached its zenith. She was the undisputed, if unofficial, power behind Lord MacLeod, and through him a significant force within the newly established Scottish monarchy. Her daily routine was a relentless exercise in administration, intelligence analysis, and strategic communication. She maintained a vast network of informants across Scotland and northern England, keeping her apprised of English movements, rival clan intrigues, and even the king's occasional lapses in judgment. Her quill was as mighty as any sword, drafting critical diplomatic letters, analyzing financial accounts, and advising on matters of law and land disputes. She understood that overt power was dangerous for a woman in her position. True power lay in the ability to anticipate, to advise, and to manipulate without ever seeming to lead. Her goal was the long-term stability and independence of Scotland, a stability that secured her family's future. The fragile peace between Scotland and England, secured by the new Scottish king, was always tenuous. Whispers of a new English invasion began to spread, fueled by border skirmishes and the unwavering ambition of Edward I's successor. Alys saw the signs earlier than most. She compiled detailed reports on English troop movements, the construction of new siege engines, and the buildup of their naval fleet. She urged the king, through Duncan and Liam, to strengthen the coastal defenses, to replenish the royal treasury, and to seek new assurances from France. Her warnings, initially met with complacency by some at court, became increasingly urgent and specific. She understood that this new war would be different. It would be a war of attrition, demanding not just courage, but meticulous planning and resilient infrastructure. She began to personally oversee the strategic provisioning of MacLeod lands, stocking granaries and reinforcing smaller watchtowers, preparing for the inevitable conflict. As the English invasion became imminent, Alys faced her hardest decision yet. The king, pressured by some of his advisors, wanted Liam, as a young, promising noble, to be sent to the front lines of the initial battles, a move that Alys knew would expose him to unnecessary risk. She understood the king's desire to inspire his troops with a young, noble leader, but she also knew it was a waste of Liam's strategic potential. Alys secretly orchestrated a plan. She convinced Duncan to volunteer for a dangerous but strategically vital mission to gather intelligence deep behind enemy lines, subtly implying that Liam's place was at court, managing the critical logistical supply chains she had established, which were too complex for anyone else to oversee effectively. This removed Liam from the immediate battlefield without dishonor, while placing him in a position where his skills, honed by Alys, would be invaluable for the long war. It was a risky mother's gambit, securing her son's survival and future by subtly manipulating the narrative of his deployment, ensuring he would be present and powerful when the final victory, or defeat, was decided. With England's full invasion of Scotland underway, the need for direct French intervention became desperate. The old alliance, though renewed, was largely a diplomatic and financial arrangement. Now, Scotland needed troops, ships, and a diversion of English forces. Alys, seeing the dire strategic situation, activated her deepest French connections. She secretly drafted a series of compelling, urgent appeals to the French king, not as a Scottish noblewoman, but as a loyal daughter of France, reminding him of their shared Capetian blood and the strategic advantage of distracting England from continental affairs. She meticulously outlined the specific English military assets currently deployed in Scotland, demonstrating how a targeted French naval action could sever English supply lines and force a significant redeployment of their forces. Her letters were carried by trusted, clandestine messengers, risking torture and execution if caught, bypassing official channels to ensure their swift and impactful delivery to the French court. The French king, swayed by Alys's strategic arguments and his own geopolitical ambitions, dispatched a small but influential embassy to Scotland, led by a haughty, aristocratic ambassador. The ambassador, however, seemed more concerned with French prestige and protocol than with the immediate military crisis. Alys quickly realized that his presence was a blessing, but also a burden. She quietly assigned Liam, using his French education and diplomatic skills, to act as the liaison to the French delegation. Liam, under Alys's constant, subtle guidance, skillfully navigated the ambassador's ego and secured the necessary commitments for troops and naval support. Alys herself, observing from a distance, provided Liam with the intelligence on the French diplomat's personal weaknesses and desires, allowing Liam to frame the Scottish pleas in a way that appealed to the ambassador's vanity and sense of strategic importance. She ensured the French aid arrived, not through overt command, but through the expert manipulation of aristocratic egos and diplomatic formalities. The arrival of French reinforcements, however limited, dramatically shifted the tide of the war, providing the Scottish forces with much-needed morale and tactical support. The English, stretched thin and now facing a potential two-front war, were forced to withdraw a significant portion of their forces. In a rare moment of personal reflection, Alys received a letter from her estranged sister, Marie, still in France, who had, unknown to Alys, used her own subtle influence within the French court to champion Alys's appeals and expedite the dispatch of the French aid. Marie's letter, filled with veiled references to their shared childhood and silent acknowledgments of the paths they had taken, brought a rare tear to Alys's eye. It was a reminder that even across kingdoms and years, the bonds of family, however strained, could still hold power. Alys immediately penned a personal reply, not of politics, but of genuine gratitude, cementing a crucial, if silent, alliance between the two sisters, an alliance that would prove invaluable for the future of the MacLeod line in a new, more stable Scotland. Scotland, battered but ultimately victorious against the English invasion, began the long process of reconstruction. But victory came with its own scars. Many clans had suffered grievous losses, and the land was ravaged. Alys found herself consumed by the practicalities of rebuilding, organizing supplies for famine-struck regions, arbitrating land disputes, and helping to re-establish trade routes. She worked tirelessly alongside Duncan, who, despite his advanced age, was still a formidable presence. Yet Alys also recognized the deep-seated grievances that simmered beneath the surface. Clans that had suffered more than others felt overlooked. Those who had collaborated with the English during the occupation now sought forgiveness, or worse, retribution. Alys, having spent years mastering the intricate web of Scottish loyalties, was often the only one who could navigate these dangerous currents, using diplomacy and strategic concessions to prevent new internal conflicts from erupting. The English threat, though repelled, was far from gone. While the main army had retreated, English garrisons remained in strategically important castles along the border, acting as constant thorns in Scotland's side and providing bases for future incursions. Alys knew that true peace would only come when these last vestiges of English occupation were removed. She developed a long-term strategy for their expulsion, combining subtle diplomatic pressure with localized, targeted military actions by Scottish forces, often orchestrated by Liam. She meticulously studied the supply lines and weaknesses of each remaining English stronghold, advising on blockade tactics and psychological warfare to force their surrender without resorting to costly full-scale sieges. Her aim was to dismantle the English presence piece by piece, avoiding a direct confrontation that could reignite the full-scale war. As Lord Duncan MacLeod entered his final years, the question of his succession became paramount. While Liam was the clear heir, Alys knew that merely inheriting the title was not enough. She ensured that the MacLeod clan's power base was not only strong militarily, but also economically and politically intertwined with the wider Scottish court. She used her remaining influence to secure key appointments for loyal MacLeod kinsmen within the royal administration and ensured lucrative trade agreements that benefited the clan. Her goal was to guarantee Liam's seamless transition into leadership and to protect the vast network of influence she had painstakingly built over decades. On his deathbed, a man of few words looked at Alys, his eyes filled with a lifetime of respect and love, simply stating, "You were the true strength, my lady." With his passing, Alys, though now a widow, did not retreat into mourning. She stepped forward, ensuring her legacy through her son, ready to guide the MacLeod clan into a new era of Scottish independence, a testament to her enduring will and strategic genius.
Lord Duncan MacLeod's death in 1320 marked not an end to Alys's influence, but a profound transformation of it. Now a widow, Alys shed the constraints of being Lady MacLeod and embraced a new, more direct form of power. Liam, though officially the Laird, instinctively deferred to his mother's wisdom and strategic acumen. Alys established herself as the de facto regent of the MacLeod lands, actively participating in clan councils and guiding Liam's decisions with a firm, intelligent hand. Her years of managing the household and the war effort had prepared her perfectly for this role. She streamlined the clan's administration further, initiated ambitious rebuilding projects in devastated regions, and cemented new alliances with other powerful Scottish lords who recognized her unrivaled political intelligence. She was not merely a keeper of tradition, she was a proactive architect of the future, ensuring the MacLeod's continued prominence in a newly independent but still volatile Scotland. Alys's strategic focus shifted to the next generation, her grandson, young Duncan, Liam's heir. Recognizing the changing political landscape, Alys ensured that young Duncan's education was even more comprehensive than Liam's. She brought in scholars from universities in Paris and Bologna to teach him advanced Latin, Greek, mathematics, and philosophy, alongside the traditional Scottish martial and clan lore. Her vision was to forge a new kind of Scottish leader, a man who was a fierce warrior, but also a cultured diplomat and a rigorous intellectual, capable of navigating the complex web of European power politics. Alys personally tutored her grandson in the art of political observation and the critical analysis of intelligence, instilling in him the same quiet ruthlessness and long-term vision that had defined her own life. She saw in him the embodiment of her greatest legacy, a leader who would unite the disparate strengths of his Scottish and French heritage. Even in apparent peace, danger lurked. A disillusioned former MacLeod vassal, embittered by the clan's ascendancy, attempted to sow discord by spreading rumors that Alys, despite her widow's weeds, was secretly practicing French pagan rites and influencing Liam through dark magic, echoes of the old heresy accusations.
This time, the attack was more insidious, targeting the common folks' superstitions. Alys, having learned from her previous encounter with Archbishop Thomas, did not immediately confront the accuser. Instead, she subtly used her network to discredit him, exposing his own past misdeeds and financial corruption to the local clergy and commoners, while simultaneously increasing her visible acts of Christian charity and piety throughout the MacLeod lands. She funded the rebuilding of a local church and personally oversaw the distribution of food to the poor during a harsh winter. By demonstrating her unwavering faith and benevolence, she rendered the accusations of witchcraft baseless in the eyes of the people, isolating the accuser and ensuring his swift, quiet downfall without ever publicly acknowledging the slander. Alys, now recognized as a formidable political power in her own right, embarked on a new phase of strategic diplomacy, forging stronger, more formal alliances between the MacLeod clan and other powerful, independent-minded Highland clans. She understood that a united front was the only true guarantee against future English aggression and internal strife. Instead of relying solely on royal decree, Alys initiated personal visits, traveling to remote castles and holding lengthy, intricate negotiations with clan chiefs known for their fierce independence and skepticism towards outside influence. She brought gifts of French wine and fine cloth, but more importantly, she brought a deep understanding of their local grievances, their proud histories, and their common interests. Her patience, her sharp intellect, and her proven track record of securing Scottish independence gradually won over even the most wary chieftains, creating a web of interconnected loyalties that transcended simple fealty to the king. The newly forged alliances, however, often came with a price. One powerful clan, the formidable MacLauchlins, offered their full support to the MacLeods and the king, but only in exchange for a significant portion of disputed borderlands, traditionally held by a smaller allied clan, the Stuarts. This presented Alys with a profound dilemma, securing a powerful ally at the cost of alienating a loyal but weaker one. Alys, with Liam's assistance, devised a shrewd compromise. She orchestrated a marriage alliance between young Duncan MacLeod and the MacLauchlin chieftain's daughter, solidifying the new bond with blood. Simultaneously, she personally negotiated a generous land exchange with the Stuarts, compensating them with newly acquired fertile lands from forfeited English estates further south, ensuring their loyalty. It was a complex juggling act of familial bonds, territorial rights, and strategic benefits, meticulously managed by Alys to achieve a lasting peace without sowing seeds of future resentment. As Alys solidified Scotland's internal alliances, a more distant threat emerged. Reports from her French contacts indicated that the English king, while temporarily subdued, was secretly attempting to forge a new alliance with powerful Flemish merchants and disgruntled northern French nobles, intending to launch a devastating attack on France, which would inevitably draw Scotland back into a wider European war. Alys immediately understood the implications for Scotland. She dispatched her most trusted and discreet agents to the Scottish king, providing him with a detailed, coded warning of the impending pan-European conflict, and urging him to prepare Scotland's defenses not just against England, but against the wider implications of a continental war. She advised him to reinforce diplomatic ties with Norway and Ireland, seeking to create a northern maritime alliance that could counter the Anglo-Flemish naval threat. Her foresight, honed by decades of observation and strategic analysis, once again placed Scotland ahead of the curve, preparing it for a future conflict that few others had yet imagined. By her 60s, Alys de Valois was no longer the young French bride, nor even the formidable regent. She was an elder stateswoman, revered and feared in equal measure, known across Scotland as the Iron Lady of the North. Her influence was so profound that even the king sought her counsel on matters of national importance. She had successfully guided Liam into becoming a respected and capable laird, and young Duncan, her grandson, was now a promising leader, embodying the blend of Scottish strength and continental intellect she had envisioned. Alys, however, never truly retired. She maintained her vast correspondence network, continued to advise on strategic land management, and served as the ultimate arbiter in complex disputes between clans, her decisions rarely challenged due to her undeniable wisdom and long-standing reputation for fairness. Her presence was a comforting yet demanding anchor in the turbulent sea of Scottish politics. In her later years, Alys experienced a period of relative peace, a rare luxury in her life. The English threat receded for a time, Scotland's internal alliances held firm, and her family prospered. This afforded her the opportunity to focus on cultural and educational pursuits. She commissioned a great library in Castle MacLeod, filling it with Latin and Gaelic texts, and established a small informal school for the children of the clan's minor nobles and even gifted commoners, ensuring that knowledge and literacy spread beyond the immediate family. She encouraged the collection of Scottish sagas and songs, ensuring the preservation of their unique cultural heritage. Alys, who had always valued intellect as much as might, reveled in these years, seeing them as the true fruits of her strategic labor, a secure, cultured Scotland built on the foundations she had so carefully laid. Alys de Valois passed away peacefully in 1345 at the remarkable age of 67, surrounded by her loving family. Her death was mourned across Scotland, not just by the MacLeods, but by the king and countless clan leaders who had benefited from her wisdom. Her legacy was not of a warrior queen, but of a true architect of nations. She had taken a small, embattled French noble family, and through her relentless intellect, strategic genius, and quiet determination, had woven them into the very fabric of Scottish power. Liam and young Duncan, fully formed and capable leaders, continued her work, securing the MacLeod position for generations. The school she founded thrived, the library became a regional treasure, and the alliances she forged held firm. Alys de Valois, the French girl who became the Iron Lady of Scotland, proved that even without a crown or a sword, a woman's mind, if sharp enough, could shape the destiny of a kingdom and leave an indelible mark on history.